Hello and welcome to TA Intel, a podcast about the business of small business support. Each episode of TA Intel offers practical insights on leadership and professional development for the people who run and deliver services in entrepreneurial support organizations. I'm your host, Christian Conroy. I have over 30 years of experience in leading organizations that enable small businesses to start, grow, survive, and thrive. I provide leadership and strategic support to economic development and educational organizations across the country. Joining me in this episode is Mike Brooks, the Associate State Director of the Alabama SBDC. In this show, we explore how leaders of entrepreneurial support organizations can use analysis of their program's past performance to understand strengths and gaps, make smarter management decisions, and identify opportunities for improvement and growth. We hope your takeaway will be that your past performance data is not just a reporting requirement, but is actually a management tool. Let's hear from Mike. All right. Well, hello and welcome to TA Intel. Today, we're joined by Michael Brooks, and Mike is the Associate State Director of the Alabama SBDC. And Mike is here to talk to us about how we can use performance data in the management of our entrepreneurial support programs. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us here on TA Intel. Actually, before we dive into the conversation, I think, and I hate to kind of do this up front, but I don't want to lose people right away, but I do think it's important that maybe we kind of set the ground rules a little bit and talk about definitions. So, when we are talking about performance data, what exactly are we referring to? Because people use terms like, metrics and deliverables and KPIs and leading and lagging indicators and all sorts of stuff like this. So can you kind of frame a little bit for us what it is that exactly we're going to be talking about and what the differences are between these different types of data points?
Yeah. Thanks, Christian. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and talk about this fun topic. I think a lot of times, sometimes those terms can be used interchangeably, but good point. Let's start with a couple of definitions. If you're looking at the metrics, deliverables, KPIs, metrics broadly defined as anything that you measure, and that could be the really important stuff to the really minute details. Deliverables, that's what you've signed up for. That is what you have promised back to your stakeholder, and different stakeholders are going to have different things that they're looking for. KPIs, those could be metrics, but usually a KPI, that's more on the operational side of things. These are the things that you're looking at. They're going to help you make decisions to arrive at those deliverables, to arrive at the outcomes, to meet the mission and vision of what your organization is trying to accomplish. I think if you want to break it down further, looking at those different definitions, you also have reporting data, management data, and strategic data. On the reporting side, it's just looking back and figuring out, did we meet the requirement? Did we do the minimum that we needed to do that our stakeholder was looking for? It tends to be backwards looking, and reporting data is basically about accountability. Are we going to be in business next year? Did we do the minimum that we needed to do to keep the lights on? Management data is sort of the next step above that, looking at operations. What needs attention right now? What can we look at that is going to allow us to make decisions to improve things, correct things in the near future? This is, I think, the important part, and probably where we can talk more. This is where you start to identify where some of the gaps are, bottlenecks, performance issues, things that are preventing you from achieving what you need to. And then finally, looking at strategic data, and this is going to be the higher value data points, looking at the trends and patterns, things that over time are going to make a difference to the organization. And that's really where you get to the point where you're looking at data not as just an accountability tool. We're not just reporting on things, but diving deeper to find out, so how can we use data to drive growth and innovation?
I think those are some really interesting and helpful distinctions that you made between both the different types of data that you have, as well as the different, ways that you can use it. And you're kind of teasing around, I think, kind of here the value proposition of this episode. So, not everybody listening is a data nerd. So for, leaders who are busy running programs and managing staff and serving clients, why is this topic even should be of interest to them? Why should they care?
Not everyone's a data nerd. That's
no.
I think every organization needs to have at least one data nerd. You need to have somebody in there that's passionate about the numbers. Uh, looking at the data and being passionate about it, it gets the organization from thinking instead of terms of did we hit our numbers, uh, we want to dive deeper and figure out what are our numbers telling us to do next. We're shifting from reporting requirements to making a management tool. Um, now, why is that important beyond just making this into a management tool? Uh, when you're looking at trends over time, it's going to give you better intelligence and allow you to make better decisions about what you're doing with your program. A quarter of data might be a great snapshot in time, but it doesn't necessarily tell you if you're improving, if you're getting better. It doesn't tell you anything about the operating environment. Is this a temporary setback, or is this part of a larger shift in the environment or within the organization? And I think looking at the trend data really helps you understand what the program is doing, and really it helps you to avoid overcorrecting based on one data point. So you've got this isolated data. You can make really bad decisions based on one data point. But if you're looking at it over time, it helps. Well, one other thing that I just quickly point out.
Yeah.
I think again, having that one data nerd in the organization, one of the things it allows you to do is it really helps to strengthen your credibility with stakeholders. I think many times we can report back to stakeholders, this is an outcome, this is a number that we achieved. But when you can provide some context and some understanding and show them how you're actively managing a program, it's one thing to say we have X number of business starts or X number of clients served. I think it's another thing when you can explain back to the stakeholder, this is why we achieved this number, this is how we got there, this is where it's headed. Whether that's a good thing, it's heading in the right direction because of all the great things we've done in the last year, or things are headed in a negative direction. And then you get to talk about, we knew this was going to happen, we've prepared for this, here are the things we've already started to do to correct this downward trend, instead of a surprise annual report where there's just a number.
Right. Well, I think it gets back to what, when you were setting out the framework for the definitions, it's the difference between reporting, management, and being strategic. And I think I mean, that was kind of, the answer to it wasn't a trick question or anything, but I mean, you got to that, I think, in terms of talking about how you can use this data in various ways. And I think, tying it back to sustainability and being able to access resources is kind of the crux of it for everybody. I mean, so the first part that you mentioned was, reporting, and that's a way for us to be able to demonstrate back to the funder that, we did what you paid us for. But like, as you just said, which I think is kind of the key point here, is we can tell a much bigger story that can hope to build that relationship and hope to increase the amount of resources that then get put into the program, because we can demonstrate with solid data, what they're getting for that funding. Excuse me. So I think that's a good point. And it's interesting because one of the things that I've heard leaders say before is, we're only going to pay attention to those data points that are required by our funders. And, why should I look at anything else? Because if they don't care about it, why should I care about it? What would you say to somebody who has that kind of an attitude?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair. You obviously want to at least pay attention to what your stakeholders want, but I guess the real question is, instead of asking why should we look at data points other than the ones that our stakeholders require, I think the real question is, why would we want to limit ourselves to the bare minimum, to just what the stakeholders are asking from us, when we have the ability to possibly get better results, better serve entrepreneurs, better serve the clients that we're serving by looking at a much broader picture, by looking at all of the numbers and all the processes that underpin the service delivery. Deliverables tell you if you performed, but doesn't necessarily tell you how well you performed. I guess a good example, diving deeper, you could have two centers that each have the same outputs. We each serve 200 clients. And then the real question is, well, are these two centers equal? Because one of them might have hit all of the segments, might have produced more impact. They might have achieved the things that you want a center or an individual location to achieve towards your mission or vision, or the other one checked the box and they got that stakeholder required number of clients, but which of them is actually helping you grow the organization?
Right. I think what you're pointing out here is really important, which is there's, we have a lot of data, right? I mean, we collect a ton of data as, in an entrepreneurial support organization. And really, it then becomes which ones are most useful and effective from a management and strategic perspective. Because I mean, I think the example you just gave was, helping to illustrate that. So, maybe having something as simple as just, clients, that's not really a helpful metric, perhaps, in terms of, understanding the health and performance of an organization. So from your experience, have you found, what have you found to be metrics that are useful from a leadership and management perspective?
The I think the metric that you select, it's going to vary based on the needs of the organization. The one that is most useful is the one that's going to help you make better decisions and perform at a higher level. So there's no sort of like this is the one thing that you should look at. But as examples, just, things I've seen in the last many years, several folks in the SBDC world had struggled with business starts. Okay, how do we improve our performance towards helping entrepreneurs start a business? And then toward, that's a lagging indicator. Once that shows up on the dashboard, there's nothing you can do with that number. That's what we did last month. And where I've seen a lot of usefulness is organizations that will look at those leading indicators that allow you to determine what will we get in the future. So if you're looking at business starts, what are your inputs? Well, we have to have individuals, entrepreneurs come to us before they've started a business. And then you start looking at number of pre-venture clients. So, an easy ratio would be if we're expecting to, or if last year we had 200 business starts and we saw 2,000 pre-venture individuals. That way we know last year we had a 10-to-1 ratio. For every 10 pre-venture clients we see, we know we're going to get one business start out of it. So if I'm projecting into the future, assuming everything else is equal, it tells us on a monthly basis how many pre-venture clients do we need to see, or at the end of the quarter, if we're ahead or behind schedule, we know months in advance the probability that we're going to hit that goal by the end of the performance period, based on some of the leading indicators. And then you could, back that up further. Then you get better decisions on that ratio. Can we improve that ratio? Can we attract better clients into the pipeline that are going to allow us to hit those business starts? Can we find better off ramps for the folks that are not ready to start a business, but they need some additional assistance elsewhere? And so you've got multiple moving factors, but to your question, what is the most important piece of data collect? And it's going to vary based on the need of the organization and what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. No, and I think the example that you just provided is excellent in terms of, first you have to understand what it is that you want to accomplish, and then you need to figure out what kind of data do you collect to track your progress towards that, and then how can you use that to help influence kind of daily operations to make sure that activities are happening that's going to get you to where you want to end up. And I love this. I love the example that you shared about, how do you figure out if you've got an objective of, or an aspiration or a goal of trying to start a certain number of businesses, taking those steps backwards, deconstructing that to figure out, okay, in order to do that, we need to see 2,000 pre-ventures. And how do we get 2,000 pre-ventures? We have to do, 100 how to start a business workshops, and how many people do we need to attend those? And that I think that's a terrific example of that.
Well, and then from there, once you have that data point, then you can start looking at the workshop and figuring out, are we delivering the right content in the workshop?
Exactly.
Does one presenter do a better job at converting these folks?
That's a great
based
one.
on geography? Is it based on content? And
your partners,
again,
who's referring people to these programs?
And then you get, multiple layers of data that all lead up to that, one goal you're trying to accomplish.
Right. No, I think that's a really strong example. I think that makes it very concrete in terms of thinking about, how you can, which data points are going to be most important as a leader to really kind of pay attention to on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier because I thought it really kind of struck a nerve for me. You were talking about how the importance of looking at trend data, because if you just look at maybe a performance metric in isolation over one time period, it may give you inaccurate information, and you might make a bad decision. And it's funny. I can recall a conversation I had recently with somebody, and that was kind of the advice that I gave back to them. They were all concerned because they got their satisfaction numbers had changed significantly in the previous quarter. And I said, well, how does that compare to others? And they're like, well, we haven't done others yet. And I'm like, well, let's wait and see. This could be an isolated incident. Blah blah blah. So when in thinking about that, so let's broaden this out to talk about how you trend data. So what kind of comparisons are most useful? I mean, do you think about this like year over year? Do you do, staff person to staff person? Do you do it by industry sector? I mean, are there things that you would suggest we think about in terms of the timing and cadence of trend analysis?
Yeah, great question. I hate to say again, the cadence is going to depend on what you're trying to accomplish.
That's a good point. Yeah,
A
right.
good example, if
yeah.
A lot of organizations will have an employee satisfaction or employee engagement survey, and they might do that once a year. If you're in an organization that's pretty stable and you've got low turnover and things seem to be working pretty well, then an annual survey might be perfect. Give you some data that you could use for strategic planning, for employee recognition. But let's say the opposite is true. Let's say you're an organization that has higher turnover, that you've had some major changes in hosts or major changes in policies, or you've pivoted from full-time to contractor part-time employees. The personnel side of the organization has been upended in the last year. Well, when you're implementing major changes with organizational structure and you're trying to make sure your employees are satisfied and engaged, and you're trying to figure out why they keep leaving and what you can do about that, an annual survey all of a sudden might seem terribly inadequate. That's when you might, in the past, it might have been annual, but that might be something you want to monitor maybe on a quarterly basis. Okay. And then maybe segment that out and understand what are the pain points for your newer employees versus the ones in the middle versus the ones that have been around. Again, from a timing standpoint, you're going to get more actionable intelligence if you're doing it more than just once a year. Others, you could look at some market or demographic data monthly, but you'd probably be wasting your time. Some of those need a nice long annual horizon to be able to get fresh data, to be able to make smart choices. But the cadence might vary. You might, one organization might look at the geographic distribution of their customers, of their clients, and if they're trying to accomplish something and it's a long-term strategic goal, they might look at it once or twice a year. But if you've got stakeholders that have come out and said, hey, rural outreach is really important, we need to make this happen now, and they're expecting to see results, you might start managing or monitoring that a monthly or quarterly basis, whereas in the past it used to be a year.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess it gets back to, like you said at the beginning of your comments, it's what are what's your objective in terms of doing this? So I think there's, two pieces. One is there's kind of a lot of the examples you gave, I think, relate to, management and trying to accomplish something specific. And that's where you have that, you have leading indicators and things like that. But I think trending, though, for the most part, especially from like a leadership perspective, you're using this to kind of understand the overall kind of health of the organization and identifying maybe strengths and gaps that you might have. So I think you do kind of need that. I mean, at least from my perspective, I think having that longer time horizon probably is more helpful to do something like that. I mean, it's like the criticism you always hear about, corporations, that they only manage for the quarter, right? They're trying to make sure their stock price stays high. And, in most entrepreneurial support organizations, you have the luxury of a longer time frame. You're not necessarily measured on quarterly performance. So I think that from using data to manage on a regular basis, that should occur regularly, but maybe trending should happen on a more infrequent basis.
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think a corollary to that, to take it a step further beyond just trending, I think to your example is using that one data point, is not only, you know, you run the danger when you look at one data point of making a bad decision. You also run the danger of looking at a data point without any context around it as to
Okay.
making a bad decision. So you might have I'll use the employee survey as another example. You might have a dozen questions on your employee survey, and you've got one low scoring question. And management might look at that and decide, well, we need to make changes based on this one data point that seems really low. And this is where I think benchmarking pays off immensely, because if you've got peer organizations or others that ask a similar question that you can benchmark against, all of a sudden you find out, yes, this was a low score, but relative to 5 or 6 other organizations, we did really well on this data point. So then it becomes, you're not misplacing management time chasing after one
Right.
low data point instead of looking at the things that actually matter for the organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Which is a plug for, we have a whole nother episode on benchmarking that was done with Mike Daniels, so check it out. So now that we collect all this data and we're analyzing it and stuff like that, from a leadership and management perspective, have you seen any best practices, or do you have any recommendations on kind of how you can present that in a way that it's not overwhelming? And I know this isn't audio, we're not doing like, PowerPoint or live presentation or anything, but are there recommendations that you have about like what should be on a dashboard? Or I'm just trying to think, how can we make this information easily digestible and actionable?
Sure. Well, I think that is definitely a challenge for a lot of organizations. The data nerd will see this massive chart and tables and graphs and absorb all of it. But everyone else in the organization, their eyes quickly glaze over. They can't discern what is important, or what are the things that we need to actually pay attention to versus the ones that we're monitoring versus the ones that we're just tracking. And so I think the answer to that is, when you present the information, make sure it's chunked out in a way that everyone understands. These are the top 4 things. These are the key performance indicators. These are the things that if we don't get this done, there are problems. And then understand other metrics. These are the things that we're tracking. These might be leading indicators. We're keeping an eye on these because they're going to make a difference over time, or they're going to help us achieve some of the things we want in the organization. When you chunk it out in that way and prioritize it and label it, one of the things that we've seen is you'll get a dashboard or a scorecard that is 27 lines long, and everything gets lost. No one knows where to start. I've seen those organized so at least they have section headings so that your folks understand, like, hey, this is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 as to where we should be paying attention. But the same thing goes for converting that into a presentation, putting that into PowerPoint, just condensing it into a way that is absorbable by folks so they can understand how their inputs, how their actions make a difference on the different parts of the scorecard, the different KPIs that you have. Presenting it all at once is overkill, and you quickly lose people at that point.
Well, I just reached up onto my bookshelf and pulled out one of the books that I consider to be one of my go-to sources for information. I highly recommend to everybody. It's called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. As you can see, it's dog-eared, and I've got bookmarks in here. But anyway, one of the 4 disciplines is the importance of a good dashboard. And so for anybody listening to this who's interested in, how can you most effectively structure an effective dashboard, I would highly recommend you take a few minutes to look at that chapter in this book. So Mike, one of the things that I think you bring a really interesting and unique perspective to in terms of this conversation is you've had, an opportunity to visit economic development and entrepreneurial support organizations all over the country. And, thinking back upon this conversation that we've had, do you have any examples maybe that you could share where you've seen performance assessment being used effectively in an organization, maybe to address a strategic issue or improve performance, or, that maybe has led to additional resources that an organization has been able to obtain?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. If you've got an organization that has multiple locations and you're trying to manage those from a performance standpoint, Sometimes making an apples to apples comparison can be challenging because you've got different environmental factors, you've got different things that may make one location perform better or worse than another, but there's usually some common denominator that you can use to look at performance. One of the things I've seen used a few times very effectively is breaking down a cost per counseling hour. So instead of just looking at the number of hours or the number of clients, creating that ratio to understand, if we were charging for this or based on the investment of the lead organization, what kind of outputs, what are the cost per output. And it doesn't necessarily have to be per counseling hour, it could be cost per any type of outcome that you're looking for. That way, if you're making a comparison between two locations, you have a way of saying, if one of the stakeholders comes to us with additional funding and says, we would like to invest additional dollars into the organization, and then from a leadership standpoint, you get to decide, where am I going to invest? If you've got a dashboard that shows the cost per counseling hour, it shows you very quickly, why would I invest in the high cost counseling when I've got some more cost effective centers over here that I could invest in? I think that's a data point that resonates well with a lot of the stakeholders and support organizations that are looking for ROI data. When you put it in basic terms, in dollar terms in particular, it really helps to drive home the performance aspect and understanding what high performance or lack of performance might mean for that particular location. Other examples, it's going to depend on what a stakeholder is looking for in particular. We've seen organizations that have had a strong emphasis on rural outreach, and that becomes, do we just want to go out and see how many people we can touch in a rural county and say, look, we did rural outreach? Or is there a way to have some additional performance measure around that says, hey, not only did we find someone in this rural county, but we have positive impact on them. And so we've seen organizations, instead of just looking at a head count of folks in rural county X, it's how many dollars of capital infusion did we have in this county in this quarter this year versus last year. If we're really going to make an impact in the rural community, it's not just touching them, it is, are we having economic development and economic impacts that occur as a result of those efforts.
Well, it's interesting, your first example talking about, using like the ROI data to help make the case for increased investments. I also think that one of the things that brings up is that example, I think, illustrates the importance of benchmarking, because once you get that figure, you need to know, how does that compare to others? Because if you go to somebody, let's say to a legislator, and you say, hey, I can, our organization is great, we can create a job for, $5,000 or, whatever it might be. But if another organization is also competing for funding, and they may come in and say, well, every job that we create only costs $2,000, or maybe for them it's $10,000. But it's really, I think, in that type of an example, critical to know the context of your performance compared to others.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes it helps to maybe know what some of those other numbers are. There might be some data points that you use internally for internal decision making versus data points that you use to sell the program externally.
Right. Yeah, and that's just it, because sometimes you may do this analysis, and you got to be careful of who sees that,
might not get the right answer. Yeah.
Right. How widely do you share?
Oh, it just tells you. Yeah. It finds that additional opportunity for improvement, so you can use that number in the future. And then what do you do now so that next year, when we have to go back to the funder, the legislature, whoever, we have a better story to tell, a better number for us.
Yeah. So no, I think that's helpful. Let's just, while we're talking about how do you, trend and benchmark, I think, one of the things that we're all experimenting with these days and trying to figure out how it might be useful is, using AI to help in terms of analyzing our data and things like that. Have you seen, what have you seen in terms of pros and cons in terms of how organizations have been using AI in ways that maybe can be effective, or have you seen any items that maybe we should be cautious about, or we just need to be cognizant of when using these tools?
Yeah, I'll start with the the cautionary tale, and I think it's
Okay.
the caution that we see in the use of any AI tool for anything that we're doing, which is understanding data security, confidentiality, understanding what you're putting into it. Um, One of the dangers, at least from a leadership standpoint, is just making sure you understand that AI sees data. It's great at detecting maybe trends and patterns, but leaders see context. So AI might be a useful tool to give you some perspective, but leadership is going to is going to know the difference between, hey, this data is trending down, and AI might tell you to head in one direction, but you see the full picture and you understand why the data is heading in the negative direction and why making an abrupt change might be a really bad idea. It, AI sees correlations, but not necessarily causation. The other cautionary part is, garbage in, garbage out. You put bad data in, you're going to get bad analysis. Not necessarily bad data, it could just be missing data. I know there's an example a year or two ago. I think it was an organization that had done analysis based on NAICS codes to try to understand what industry segments were or were not being served. And the data showed that they were massive gaps in one or two sectors versus the statewide population of that particular industry. And if you were to make decisions based solely on that, you have headed in a completely wrong direction and had a lot of wasted time and investment going after these segments. Diving into the data, it looked like there was a massive gap because half of the data points were null. There were missing NAICS codes. So you're making massive decisions on fractional data. So, when it comes to using AI, I take more of a balanced position. It's a great tool. It can be an accelerator of analysis, but it's not a replacement for judgment or making sound decisions. If used improperly, AI can just help you arrive at bad decisions faster.
Yep. No, I agree.
But it's definitely, we in a lot of entrepreneurial support organizations, we have these databases that collect massive amounts of data, and I think AI has potential to be a great tool to dive in and see some of the nuances, or at least give leadership some ideas as to where else we can look, opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, no, I would anticipate in a year or two from now, we're going to be much more sophisticated in how we can use these tools to, analyze our data to give us, more actionable information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the tools will improve, and it will probably tell you, are you using good data? Are we working with good data right now? It might be able to detect, we don't have a complete data set. This
Right.
is where you need to hit pause, or how to analyze the fragmented data that you do have to do something with it.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. I agree completely. So if somebody is, listening to this and they want to get better at using trending data to, where should they start? What would you suggest as one or two practical habits or first steps for people to consider?
Um, well, I think the easiest thing is start small. Figure out the one or two pain points in the organization that need attention, and work backwards from there to understand what some of the inputs are that you can do to change some of those numbers, to change the trajectory of where you're going. If you identify those data points, use them, review them consistently, and you've got quality data, and then get curious about the trends that you see over time. You'll eventually, you'll pivot, and you'll stop seeing data as just something for the data nerds, and it's not just a reporting requirement. You'll get to the point where you see data as a useful tool that you can use to make better decisions and improve the performance of the organization. And when you get performance data that can help you make those decisions, that's when it really becomes valuable from a leadership standpoint.
Right. No, I agree with you completely, and that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation with you. And I mean, I hope that this has helped to shed some light on how using, being strategic in terms of thinking about how we can better use and analyze the data that we have can really help an organization to improve their operations, improve their performance, and hopefully that should lead to funding sustainability for the organization. So I really appreciate your coming on and sharing some of your insights and experiences that you've had with this, Mike. And I think I'll probably follow up and do a second episode in a couple of months after we've had a little bit more experience in terms of how we can better use AI to meet these challenges. So
Cool.
I think this was a very insightful and informative conversation. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
No, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you for joining us. We would appreciate it if you could do three things. 1, subscribe to this podcast, TA Intel. 2, share this podcast with your colleagues. And 3, leave us a comment on what you'd like us to cover in future episodes. We hope you will join us again in another podcast of TA Intel. And if you run an SBDC, trending performance data is an accreditation requirement. To learn about other key items for accreditation, you might want to consider participating in the Ascend Accreditation Accelerator. Here's a quick overview of it.
Welcome to the Ascend Accreditation Accelerator. This program is designed to help you streamline your accreditation process. The purpose of the Ascend program is to ensure you are fully prepared for accreditation. We will help you assemble the necessary documentation and understand the standards. Through Ascend, you will receive tools for development, management, and benchmarking. You will also get samples, interview exposure, and an assessment tool for your program's operations. The program includes 7 on-demand webinars detailing the Ascend model process. It also features 6 live peer learning sessions on Wednesdays. Ascend provides 3 key tools and essential resources to demonstrate meeting the standards. A key item is the Accreditation Documentation Tool. This helps manage the materials to include in the self-study. The program also includes a benchmarking tool with charts and data to compare your performance against peers. You will use the Ascend Key Components Assessment to review strategic thinking, planning, and program results for learning and improvement. You will learn from veteran SBDC leaders with real-world experience, who will share proven and tailored approaches to manage your program and achieve accreditation. Registration for the 2026 Ascend Accreditation Accelerator cohort is now open. Be sure to register before the deadline on August 7th. You can find more details and registration information at www.taadvisors.org/courses. For more information on the Ascend Accreditation Accelerator or any of our services, please contact Christian Conroy.
TA Intel is a production of TA Advisors, LLC. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. For more information, visit taadvisors.org.